He's about 455 yards away. He's going to hit about a 2 iron, I think.
This is the School of Motion podcast. Come for the MoGraph, stay for the puns.
That's one thing I definitely try to avoid is kind of just learning, the new shiny tool just for the sake of learning that. Then you're never going to really master anything. You're going to know just a tiny bit about a million things, but you're never going to get fast enough and good enough and proficient enough with one tool to really be able to crank out stuff. So I think being sort of a bit conscious of your needs and what type of work you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish is definitely will help you get there quicker versus just kind of chasing the shiny new whatever, because they're coming out faster and faster.
Hey everybody, it's EJ sitting in for Joey on the podcast. Now, this episode is going to be a little bit different than normal. As you probably know, each School of Motion course contains multiple interviews with incredible MoGraph celebrities from all around the industry. For Cinema 4D Basecamp, I had the chance to interview one of my favorite motion design heroes, and I thought it'd be really fun to share that episode with you today. Now, our guest's been cranking out new original works of art for over 11 years and is an absolute legend in the motion design world. From working on Super Bowl halftime shows to a fashion deal with Louis Vuitton, Beeple's career has taken him further than he ever dreamed possible. So we sat down with Beeple, aka Mike Winkleman, to chat about his time in the industry. Now, Mike's one of the hardest working folks in the business, and this podcast episode from Cinema 4D Basecamp will take you deeper into the mind of the everyday champion. But first, let's hear from one of our School of Motion alumni.
My name is Mike Jones, and I live in Brighton, UK. The training I've gotten from School of Motion has changed my career. In the 2 years since I took my first course, I've been able to build a freelance business and make it my full-time occupation using all the skills I developed through School of Motion. Design skills, animation skills, and even business skills to a level where some of my more experienced animator friends are surprised I've only been in motion design for a couple of years. I'm on my 5th boot camp, and each one has been worth the investment, making its cost back very quickly and continuing to provide value long after the sessions ended. I'm very grateful to the team for the care they put into their courses and community. My name is Mike Jones, and I'm a School of Motion alumni.
Never fear, Beeple is here, and he's going to be sharing a bit of his insight into how he started learning Cinema 4D, what worked for him, what didn't, and how he used his everyday project to improve his skills. Beeple, Mike, welcome to the podcast.
What up?
And Joey's in here as well, lurking in the background, kind of stalking us as well.
Yeah, nobody cares about Joey. It's all about
he's
Mike.
just sitting there in the corner. So let's just start out with a simple question. What the hell does Beeple stand for anyways?
Beeple is Beeples are toys from the 80s. They're these fuzzy, and you can still buy them on eBay. They're these little kind of teddy bear looking things that kind of light up when you put your hand over their eyes, and they kind of beep. They kind of beeple at you, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm named for. I honestly don't fully remember that whole process. That was a long time ago. That was probably 2003, I think. So yeah, it's been quite a while since I've been doing shit under that name.
They're adorable too.
Is it like a pre-Furby? Less creepy? More creepy?
Kind of. I would say moderately I wouldn't say it's a very creepy looking, because it's got real small eyes. I don't know. It doesn't seem creepy looking to me. Maybe you're looking at it and be like, holy shit, that's creeping me the fuck out. I mean, what is creepy is a lot of times very small variances in light will make it beep. So sometimes it'll just fucking beep when you hear nothing also, what the fuck was that? Scare the fuck out of you. So that part, it can definitely scare the shit out of you.
So do you just have a room dedicated to a bunch of these toys that you just, you have a Beeple orchestra?
At one point I did have 20 of them.
Okay.
that my brother for my wedding had bought like shit ton of them. So when we came like out, there was like 20 of them at the like head table. And so, like, nobody else in my family, like my extended family, like, they don't know any of this shit. So I'm sure they were just like, what the fuck are all these, like, stuffed animals doing at the head table? So I'm sure I look like a freaking creeper. So it's like, okay, like, nobody else got it. So, yeah, that was interesting. But at that time, I had like 20 of them. And I've slowly been, like, giving them away.
It's like, why did we go to this wedding? This guy's whacked out.
Yeah, yeah. It got creepy for a second there.
Okay, so that's the creepy story behind Beeple, the origins
Yeah.
of creepy Beeple. So the viewer or the students out there that don't know your story, which I would hope that everyone knows who the heck you are. You're the most famous man in the world, the most interesting man in the world as well.
Yeah, that's
But so people who don't know your story, how did you start getting into everydays, and talk a little bit about the whole everyday project?
Sure. So the everydays are a thing I started almost 11 years now ago. And it was to get better at drawing. And I saw a illustrator from the UK named Tom Judd. He's over at animatedtv.com, or I guess it's animate.tv.
Oh yeah, animated.
Yeah, so he did a sketch a day. And so at first I wanted to get better at drawing. So I also did a drawing per day and posted it online. And this is, 2007. So this is pre Facebook, pre Twitter. I was just posting my website. Literally nobody saw it. And so, I saw that was a good way to sort of get better. I still, at the end of the year, sucked at drawing, but I was a lot better than I, was a year ago. So I'd always wanted to learn a 3D package. So I decided, oh, maybe I'll try, doing this with Cinema 4D. And I had no experience in Cinema 4D. So if you go to my website, you can see the very first render I did day one in Cinema 4D when it was like, oh sweet, like there's something about like reflections or something. I was like, this is super sweet. So yeah, that's kind of how I started, and then I just sort of kept going because I saw it was a great way to learn stuff and test out techniques and just kind of stick with something. So fast forward 11 years or whatever, and same shit, different day.
Well, all right. So at what point were you like, I want to learn 3D? What was it? Was it your work that kind of led you to the world of 3D, or, what led you on the path to 3D?
No, I think it was just seeing other people's work, and it was just like, oh man, this is like fucking sweet. And it's just something that I always had wanted to do. And prior to that, I had probably about a year before that, I had started getting a little more sort of heavily into After Effects. And I was actually making little primitive polygons in After Effects, like making cubes out of planes or whatever,
Yeah.
images, and making characters, full 3D characters with their arms were made out of cubes, and they had hands and heads, and so it was extremely, and animating them walking and shit. And so it was extremely complicated and time consuming to do that. So it was actually a lot easier doing 3D in some ways than some of the things I was trying to fake in After Effects. So it was just something seeing people's work that it was this is the only way to make work like that. I need to learn a 3D package.
Yeah, doing 3D in After Effects is my nightmare. It's making 3D cubes. Oh man.
Yeah, now I'm so bad at After Effects. I'm just a freaking baby in there. So it's I just don't use it that much. So it's I think.
So how did you begin learning 3D? What did you start making? Because you started your drawing projects to get better at drawing, and maybe a good question for that is what did you decide on what you wanted to draw? And then the second part of that question is what were you making in 3D to begin with to help learn?
So when I first started out, I was just kind of making little abstract clips and stuff like that. At that time, I was just starting to sort of make VJ clips, and I was also doing primarily what I was doing before then was like I would make a lot more short films. So after about, I think, 3 or 4 months of working in Cinema 4D, I started like making my first short film, which is at Subprime. It's like kind of like a lo-fi kind of like animation that I did. But that was sort of like learning what I needed to learn. And I think I was trying to like kind of learn a bit of everything in terms of just like dynamics and, different stuff with, modeling techniques and stuff like that. So this was before there was a ton of tutorials. So I was watching tutorials made by this guy, 3D Kiwi, over on C4D Cafe, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to download the QuickTimes and watch your little tutorial or whatever. But yeah, that was kind of, I was just sort of trying to get a sense of a bunch of things. The one thing I was not doing actually was MoGraph, interestingly enough, because after I released that Subprime movie, a lot of people were like, oh man, this is like a great use of like the cloner. How did you do this stuff with cloners? And it's like, cloner? What are you talking about? Entire short, like, and there's tons of things in it that would have been like so much easier with like cloners, but I did not know. I never like used any of the MoGraph stuff in Cinema 4D until after I had made that piece.
That's crazy. Yeah, that probably would have helped out a lot.
Yeah.
So you're downloading all this stuff on 3D Kiwi and all that stuff. So did you find it difficult? Because I mean, did you have a focus at all when you were learning, or were you just like, hey, that's cool, I'm going to learn that and download that movie and learn that skill? Or
not really.
No.
Yeah, I was just kind of like going around to like what I thought was like interesting at the time. Because at that time I was doing web design for my day job, so I had absolutely like no need for it for my work.
Oh, okay.
I was spending most of my time at work doing like 3D stuff just because my job was like insanely easy and afforded me a ton of time to just do my own thing. So I was doing, spending the majority of my day learning 3D while I was at work. But yeah, I was just like any projects. If people there was a bunch of stuff for the like Milwaukee Art Museum and stuff like that I was kind of with various groups, just doing little short films and little commercial type things. And like, I would just do anything. Like none of this was like paid. It was all just kind of like learning stuff. But yeah, I was just kind of trying to work on as much as I could just to kind of like get better. And I really didn't have any sort of like direction, I guess.
Mike, I want to ask you about that a little bit, because one of the things that I'm always curious about when I see someone who started with zero knowledge and then ends up getting really good at something is there any sort of system that they use that someone else could use? And it sounds like initially there wasn't. You were just sort of playing with 3D and maybe using like, the short film that you had in your head as motivation to learn the things you needed to do. By the way, everyone listening, we're going to be linking to everything we're talking about in the show notes. And I highly recommend you go watch Subprime, because I remember when it came out and I watched it and I immediately thought, wow, he learned the MoGraph tools really quickly. And then somewhere I heard you say that you didn't actually, you keyframed everything in it. And there's like hundreds of things. It's crazy. But anyway, so what I was going to ask you was, as you've been doing these everydays for a long time now, do you have any sort of system? Like, I want to get better at modeling, so I'm going to do modeling exercises versus this sort of seemingly random way of just trying to find things to learn.
Yes and no. I guess if you want to find the system, what I'm doing, it's everydays. The system is doing something every single day. I would say is the best sort of advice I can give to somebody in terms of like what you could sort of copy to get better. But in terms of what I'm doing with the everydays, I have a focus per year of what I'm trying to learn. This year, it's honestly, I don't even remember. I think it's like trying to get better at like composition or something. The last couple of years, I've just trying to like overall sort of get better at making images. So I haven't been super sort of stringent on what like focus. In the past, I had done sort of like ZBrush and like I did V-Ray. I wanted to learn V-Ray back when V-Ray didn't suck. There's been, before I did Illustrator for 1 year. So there has been kind of like focuses. The last couple of years, I've just sort of more been focusing on trying to get better at sort of working faster with bringing in 3D models and stuff like that, and just improving the like workflow so that I can put stuff out like really quickly. I think there would be value to sort of focusing on certain areas if you wanted to get better, if you wanted to get better at modeling or stuff like that. But to be honest, doing it day in out like that, I would get super bored if I had like a really narrow focus. Like, I'm going to just jam on modeling for the next 3 months. It's like, oh, that's going to be fucking boring as shit. Like, I need to like kind of like jump around and kind of like test out this and try this and, do, I don't know. I just can't like drill down too deep in like one area every single day.
That makes sense.
So when you were first learning 3D and all that stuff, and I could imagine like going back to when I first started learning, and I was doing it for a job, like that was for my job, and I was just doing like 3D text and putting them in some like news graphics and making 3D logos day in and day out. So like that was my focus, to like learn how to do that and then slowly expand on that. But what were like some of the challenges when you started learning 3D, since you're just doing it in your spare time? How did you narrow your focus, and how did you have any issues just trying to get used to working in 3D space and all the 3D concepts?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like in terms of that, I definitely think I took a different route than most people, because I didn't, like I was saying, didn't have any sort of clients for probably maybe the first like 3 years of working in Cinema 4D, that before I actually started like getting more like clients, at least 2 years of just like sort of making my own stuff. So I think that's sort of good and bad, because I think I look at, there's a lot of things that people who sort of are forced to move in one direction know that I don't know. Like UV mapping. I literally know nothing about UV mapping.
Join the club,
and
buddy.
That's something, well, I mean, there's a lot of people that I guarantee you know more than me about it. And I could pick a lot of different things where it's like, I know very, very little. Like IK, I know very, very little about that. I mean, there's plenty of things. I think like me sort of being my own sort of art director, creative director, whatever, like there's a lot of times where if something's like really hard, or it's like, oh, I could watch a tutorial, or I could just fucking do something different and keep moving instead of like stopping everything and like finding the answer to this. I'll usually 9 times out of 10 just be like, fuck it, I'm just going to do something different, and like not figure out how to do that thing, and just kind of like move on and like, well, I'm just going to turn the camera this way so you can't see that thing. You know what I mean? Like I'll take the like sort of easy way out to keep moving forward instead of like finding the right answer. Or I'll take some like super like hacky cheat way of doing something, if that makes sense.
Mike, do you think that it's interesting? I wanted to ask you this because I've heard you say that before, I think on Ash's podcast and other podcasts, that you don't know the quote right way to do a lot of things. You just sort of figure out another way around it, or you hide that thing that you don't know and you like cut away from it or something. And it's interesting because I think that that's actually a skill in and of itself, is knowing how to kind of fake stuff. And, in the world that I came from, which was like far less kind of photoreal 3D, more motion design, that was something I did every day. I'm curious if like, has that ever held you back, like in your career? I mean, your career is not super traditional, like in terms of a motion design career, but do you ever feel like, oh shoot, the fact that I don't actually know proper best practices for topology when I'm modeling, or I don't actually know how to UV, has that ever like held you back? Or is it just something that maybe not everyone needs to know,
Nah, I think it depends on what you want to do. I think it is, I don't think it's necessarily held my back in my career as a whole, but there's certain projects where it's like, fuck, if I just know how to like do this one thing, it would be a lot easier. And so it's kind of like sometimes there's instances where it would be much easier to just fucking know the right way to do it than me go through this like giant bullshit workaround because I don't know that right thing. So
Right.
there's certain things. The reason I will say I don't think it's held me back that much in my career is because most of the jobs that I get I'm working on smaller teams, and I'm usually doing more design work where I don't have to I don't have super specific direction that I'm taking from like clients to where it's like, we want this exact thing. And I'm not working in like bigger pipelines. Like if I was working in like a bigger pipeline on some like bigger project, like I will fuck that shit up. Like don't fucking hire me to like model some shit or like fucking light some shit or texture whatever, because I will do all these bullshit things that like will fuck your pipeline up bad. So like that's where I think it hasn't like held me back that much, because I'm not usually on bigger teams where I need to do things the like right way or it's gonna fuck the next person over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. You were like, if you need me to make that exact thing, that's not what you do. And I think that it's just good for students to know that there's a million different roles you can play as a 3D artist in this industry. And like, if you want to work on the big 40-person PSYOP piece, yeah, you probably do need to know all the quote like right ways to do things. But if you are working in a smaller sort of motion design studio sense or something like that, 2-person teams, 5-person teams, or your solo artist, you can do the Beeple thing and you can just figure out how to make it look the way you want, even if there's 100,000 extra polygons that you don't need or something like that.
Yeah. And that's, again, I guess I wouldn't recommend going the Beeple route of like not knowing how to do shit. But yeah, I think what you're saying is correct. Like when you're on smaller teams, you have a little more leeway to like, well, it's going to take longer to render because this is like fucking way unoptimized, but it's not like do or die, most of the time.
And it's so hard to know when you're a generalist and when you're a freelancer anyways, you have to wear many hats, and like there's only so much time in a day to really master all these little things. That's why you have PSYOP, and there's one guy who's the lighting guy. And there's another guy that's the UV guy, and he knows everything inside and out of the, so specialist versus generalist kind of thing. And then there's the Beeple where, it's the Beeple effect. If you're on a job and everything just, crashes because, it's Beeple was working on this. It's the Beeple effect. Don't mind it.
I think luckily for me, a lot of the projects, I'm only fucking myself over in terms of the like pipeline. So it doesn't manage to hurt too many other people.
That's good.
But yeah.
A self-inflicted Beeple. Yeah.
Pretty much.
So I think your route is a lot like a lot of people's route that started learning 3D before it became a more mainstream skill that a lot of companies and clients want in their projects. So you're all self-taught. I was self-taught in like same time frame as you, where there's no tutorials really, there's no school of motion, there wasn't even like Grayscale Gorilla at the time or anything like that. And I feel like if I went back and like as I'm learning, I'm figuring it out. Like, man, I could have been more efficient with how I learned 3D. Like I could have not focused on this one thing and focused on this other thing and been way better off. And like, I feel like when I look back at my early 3D career, I'm like, I wasted like years, like beating my head against the wall. Do you feel like you had some of those moments like where, things you learned later on in your career with 3D or really anything with creative that you wish you kind of picked up right when you started?
I mean, yes and no. I think as technologies move forward, you end up learning things that become useless. Like, I mean, even before 3D, because I was making, short films and shit like that long before I picked up 3D for probably almost, probably like 6, 7 years before I started doing 3D stuff. I think, and so I spent a shit ton, I'm 36. I, went to school went to college in the early 2000s. So I learned Flash, and that's just fucking useless. Like that was just time completely goddamn light that fucking time on fire. It is gone. So I think there's things like that, but I think those things, I guess I can't say that they're complete waste, because like from there I learned sort of like cell animation and just keyframing and shit like that. So I don't necessarily, what do you think that you feel like you learned and it was just like, wow, that was a total waste?
Well, I think for me it was, trying to just make cool stuff and not and following recipes and turning on GI and not knowing what the hell it was doing and having a, overnight render and it's not done in the morning. And my boss is like, hey, where's that thing that was a simple thing, but you effed it up because, you tried to add all these little settings and doodads and stuff with no real comprehension of what the hell I was doing.
Yeah, but I honestly think you need to go through that. You need to like learn that it's like, oh wait, I don't need to turn on every single thing. It literally will make no difference. I think that's a common thing. I still do that a lot, to be honest, where, I'll like step back. It's like, do I really need this? And you like A/B it. And it's like, that is like almost unnoticeable with that on. And it is just destroying the render.
Right.
So I think that's just something that you kind of like, I think you had to learn that the hard way, to be honest, to like, see that some of these settings and this and that is not useful. But I don't know that I would technically consider that like a waste.
I think another thing that I would do a lot too, and I think I would get to the point where I pulled a Beeple and I was like, you know what, I'm just doing this the way that I know how to do it, is like going down these rabbit holes of trying to figure out these like complex setups with expressions or espresso and thinking I accomplished something by doing something technically challenging. And at the end of the day, it's like, you watch a tutorial on how to do a complex technical thing and then it goes at one ear out the other. And you're like, well, that was kind of dumb. Like, why did I do that? Because you're following a tutorial and you're not putting it into practice. And then you forget what the hell you were doing because it wasn't applicable. So I feel like I was chasing a lot of things, like watching a tutorial because that was cool and you make it. And it's like, okay, well, how the hell am I going to work that into a local news broadcast?
No, I know exactly what you're saying. I think that though is just, you got better at problem solving. You got better at like, okay, is this really like, and seeing what's going to be useful to like learn and learning sort of, base sort of core things, core principles of animation or core principles of design, and seeing that those are going to be more useful than the, shiny whatever.
Right.
It's a one-off thing that's not really going to be that useful outside of this tutorial or whatever. So I think that, again, is another thing that sort of, I did that too. I 100% did that. So I think that's something that, I think those things give you some sort of like background knowledge though of like, I could do it this way. And then you kind of like approach things that, moving forward to like, that took a fucking long time to set up. And then like, as you're moving forward, you're like, I'm going to not do it that way because it took fucking forever. And it wasn't very like easy to change. It was very specific to that one solution. So it's like, what if I tried something else? So I feel like that's another thing where you got to kind of like get all these shitty ways of doing things out of the way to kind of like figure out a like quicker, easier, more elegant solution to the like problems that you're looking at.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this for a second because I think that I don't think there's anything wrong with, experimenting and turning on the GI settings on maximum just to see what happens, and plus ambient occlusion, plus motion blur, plus whatever, just because it probably will look cooler if I do that. But the problem that I had was not even having a foundation to know what I should go on and learn. And I think that if you're just kind of throwing darts and saying, ooh, I just saw a cool thing, where everything was kind of translucent and it kind of looked like glass, so I'm going to learn that.
Sure.
it just seems to take longer. And maybe taking longer isn't like on its own a bad thing, but like I always look at things very practically. Like if you were good, like, let me ask you this, Mike, do you think there's a way you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about the learning process and having some basic 3D, and cut the last 11 years in half, but get the same benefit out of it?
To be honest, it's I don't know, because when I was learning this, it was a very different environment than it is now. Literally, when I first got Cinema 4D, I went and bought a book because it was like, there's no videos. What do you mean videos? Like
A book.
The thing with words in it.
R10 book sitting on my shelf right here. So it's sort of it's, to be honest, kind of hard for me to put myself in the shoes of somebody starting out now,
right,
and having like just a freaking ridiculous amount of information. I will say I totally get the like overload, because there's things that I want to learn, and it's sort of I'm kind of in that same boat. Like, for instance, Unity. I would really like to learn either sort of Unity or Unreal, but it's very, daunting in terms of like where to start. There's so many tutorials, and it's kind of like, I think I feel people's sort of apprehension and their sort of, struggle with like, where the fuck do you like dig in? So do I think that there's a quicker way to cut down on that time? I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. I was going to say something else, and I realized I had no fucking answer for that.
Yeah, you can't, one of my buddies, one time he said something like, you can't A/B test life. So there's really there is no answer to that question. But I just always, that's how my brain works,
It's a good question. Let me think about that. And if I think of something that's fucking brilliant, which is probably a long shot, I will come back to you with that.
Sounds good.
Well, I think, when we were first starting learning 3D, it was kind of like, it was totally different than it is now, where you had so little information to try to learn. And now it's like you're completely overwhelmed, and doing tutorials for the past, God, I don't even know how long, like 4 or 5 years. And you can only show like a certain fragment of a certain subject in a 3D software. So it's like, I can show you a niche of a niche of a niche and show you how to do this one thing. And you have people that are interested, like when you were like, I want to do 3D. I don't even need to do it for my job. I'm just interested in it. Yeah. And you went on the 3D Kiwi site and you're just downloading stuff and like, that looks cool. But it's like, there was nothing out there. Like, there's nothing out there for fundamentals, like no one's putting a YouTube video with 10,000 likes to like, fundamentals, bro. Like, it's not a cool thing.
No, I think that's true. It's always like, here's how to like jump into like fucking advanced or like intermediate, and how to like do it. It's true. There is very few videos, and there are, but they're not popular videos that are like, here's how to do this super fucking boring thing that you really need to know if you are just starting out in 3D. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think everybody wants to do the like fucking sexy thing, the fucking sweet thing, like, 2 weeks into learning Cinema 4D, but without those fundamentals, it's going to be, really tough to sort of like just succeed as like a generalist, because there are, like you're saying, so many different like aspects of the software, and so many different sort of like rabbit holes you can go down in terms of lighting, texturing, and it's changing so quickly. The things that, made sense to do a couple of years ago, it's like, well, now there's a plugin for that. It doesn't really make sense to do that. So it's kind of like, you could do it, but it's definitely not the quickest way. So it's kind of something you always have to like kind of be keeping up with as well.
That's why just all the fundamental stuff, there's not going to be a feature that's going to update keyframing and animation and just fundamentals of animation and how to time things, like, unless AI takes control of everything someday, and like, we don't need to lay keyframes, and the keyframe system is just totally messed up. But and stuff like lighting as well. Like, good lighting is good lighting. That's not going to change. Like, software is not going to update, and an entire lighting system is going to drastically change. So, and I feel like those subjects are things that, like, specifically for me, like I was terrible at all of those things and like still learning to get better at. And, you know, if I could go back, man, I would have spent a lot more time on that stuff than, you know, dynamic, shiny balls falling all over the place, you know?
Sure. I think it's tough though, because I think it's hard to, those things are kind of, they're hard, and there's no sort of like upper limit to them. They're very sort of subjective. If you know lighting, you know, you could say I know how to light something, and two people could say that, and one of them's like sucks at it, and they think they're good at it, and it's like the other person's actually really good at it. So it's sort of like it's very subjective, lighting, color composition, stuff like that, animation versus something like, do I know how to do this technical thing? Either
Right.
you do know how to do it or you don't. So it makes it a lot more easily attainable goal. So I think it's kind of natural for people to sort of gravitate to those sort of learning, those sort of things that they want to learn when they're starting out, just because it's a lot easier, and you can kind of say, I do know this, versus like, I do know lighting. It's like, I wouldn't say I know lighting. I wouldn't say I know color. I wouldn't say I know composition. Like, I would say, you know, I'm starting to learn those things, but I would no way say it's like, I got fucking colors done.
Yeah.
Let's move on to animation.
Yeah.
Colors in the fucking bag. That's done. Check that off the list. I don't need to ever fucking learn about that. So it's kind of, you know, it's something you're never really going to feel like you've mastered. And if you do feel like you mastered it, that's probably not a good sign.
Beeple's telling you you're full of crap. You're not watching a 30-minute tutorial on color and be like, yep, nailed it. Know all that. Know everything about color theory. I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I feel like it's like a psychological thing where it's the instant gratification. Those damn millennials. And I feel like I think I'm like just at the edge of the millennial thing where you just like, you don't want to, like, you want to be able to watch a tutorial and know how to do that one thing. And yeah, those more deep subjects that are like, that's a lifelong endeavor to, you know, a career long endeavor to master the type of skills that, you know, all the fundamental aspects of lighting and 3D and animation and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's those damn millennials. I'm telling you again.
I think that like what you just said, Mike, is like pretty profound actually, that people are drawn, especially when you're learning to do motion design, you're drawn to easy wins. Like you can watch a tutorial and know exactly how the random effector works and say yes and how that works. But to learn, and it's interesting because you said that you know, you're working just on making better images, and I'm assuming that means things like composition, you know, and color theory and things like that. And, you know, I can remember like early in my career, like completely running and sprinting towards those easy wins. Like, oh, now I know how, you know, trap code particular works. Oh, now I kind of have used RealFlow, whatever. Yeah. And at some point it just dawned on me that those things weren't serving me anymore. They weren't making my work any better. And I'm just curious if you've had any sort of like, if there was any realization, like where you got to a point that you were like, you know what? I know Cinema 4D good enough. I need to actually focus on the basics now, that kind of made you go towards those uncomfortable things.
I wouldn't say that I ever got to a point where I'm like, I know this good enough. And to be honest, I think what you're talking about, I think that's how I was too. I think that's just innate, because those are, like you're saying, they're easier things. They're the things that get you in it and get you excited about it when you're first starting out. I think what sort of changed for me is I saw a lot of people who were like making awesome pictures in fucking Photoshop. And it's like, they're just fucking drawing that shit.
Right.
And it looks fucking awesome. So it's kind of like, the reason it looks awesome is because color, composition, narration, and fucking texture and detail, and, you know, a lot of atmosphere, a lot of these things that are like, have nothing to do with, you know, getting some badass greebles or some awesome fucking spec bumps. Like they're things that are, you know, just innate to like art in general. So I think that's where seeing work that was not even 3D work, and really sort of gravitating towards that stuff kind of push me in a direction that is sort of like, okay, if I want to do like better pictures, it has nothing to do with like, knowing, pushing more like in a sort of a technical standpoint, because that's sort of a different technical thing. If you really understand color, you really understand sort of like value and composition. It's a sort of different technical skill. So I don't think there was necessarily any like aha moment. It was just sort of like, I don't know. I think part of it too, to be honest, was there's so many fucking like plugins and, different technologies and Houdini and Redshift and Arnold and blah, blah, blah. There's so much shit that it was just sort of like, I think I'm going to get the most bang for my buck learning these fundamentals versus spending another, year learning this, another renderer that is, it's kind of better than the one I'm using now, but it's not like drastically better. It's more or less for what I'm doing, like going to be sort of, kind of a wash. So it's like, I think versus starting over with some of those things, because that's one of the things I think you can kind of get somewhat sort of sucked down with, is if you're constantly starting over and learning new like technologies, then you're never going to really like master anything. You're going to know like just a tiny bit about like a million things, but you're never going to get like fast enough and good enough and proficient enough with one tool to like really be able to like kind of like crank out stuff. So I think that's one thing I definitely try to avoid is kind of just learning, the new shiny tool just for the sake of learning that. I really try and like, okay, Houdini is awesome and there's people making just fucking badass shit in Houdini, but it's like, is there anything that I really like need to learn Houdini for right now that's going to like push forward what I want to do and the type of work I want to do? Not really. So, do I really want to invest the time to like learn Houdini right now? It's like, no, not really. So I think being sort of a bit conscious of like your needs and what type of work you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, I think, and what tools are going to get you there fast and what areas to focus your time on, I think is definitely will help you get there quicker versus just kind of chasing the shiny new whatever, because they're coming out faster and faster.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's super smart, is that self-awareness. And it's something that I lacked for a very long time, trying to chase all these tutorials and all this stuff. And I think now more than ever, especially with all these third-party renders and you got all these other, you got Houdini, all this other stuff, I could like, if all this stuff came out when I was learning 3D, I would be even more distracted than I was back then, just because things were totally different. Like there was no third-party. I mean, I don't even know if V-Ray had like a C4D plugin when I started learning 3D. So that was not a distraction. But man, there's so many things, and yeah, it's self-awareness, especially for newcomers, is that your time, when you invest time in yourself, it's way more maximized when you're focused on your fundamentals. You want to hike and you're like, I am 300 pounds. I'm out of shape. But if I buy some badass hiking shoes, I'm going to get to the top of Kilimanjaro or something. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to put in the hard work. You just want to like buy that thing. And I used to do that too. And sometimes my wife will be like, I want to do this one thing. I'm just going to buy this thing and that'll make me do it. Like for me, like, oh, I'm going to buy an iPad Pro and that'll make me start sketching and drawing again. It's like, but then it's like, no, EJ, you dumbass.
No,
you're just going to buy that thing and you're not going to draw. You're going to draw one thing and then just, surf Twitter or Instagram.
I've got a fucking iPad fucking Apple Pencil sitting on my desk that's probably seen about 2 hours a goddamn year since I bought it 2 years ago. So I fucking feel you there, dude.
Yeah. So I think that's a super like self-realization and just reflection is such an important thing. You do not need to buy that one thing to make you better at X.
Do not buy an Apple Pencil.
Right. You don't need the expensive Apple Pencil thing.
Yeah, I think it's tough. Yeah, I still get sucked into it sometimes too, for sure. Like I'm not trying to act like I got all this like fucking mastered. There's definitely times because it's like you see all these fucking sweet plugins and it's like, oh man, that is badass.
Yeah.
Like I want to like try that out just because it's like it's that instant sort of like reward because it sort of like offers you this like kind of like new skill. But yeah, it's tough to kind of like stay focused on sort of like, is that skill like going to be that applicable outside of the one little like after I fuck around with it just for a couple hours.
So as far as new skills and not learning new plugins or anything like that, is there? And I think you mentioned that are you taking this year to just focus on composition, right? In your everyday.
Yeah, I'm just trying to focus on, kind of color composition. One of the things that sort of has changed a lot for me fairly recently-ish in terms of my workflow is that I've started using like stock models after I hit 10 years of everydays. Before that, I had used no stock models. Everything that I did was sort of modeled by hand that day.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't just kind of like grab an asset of whatever from wherever. So I started using kind of like open the floodgates up sort of at that time to kind of, sort of use anything in terms of and trying to tell sort of more complex stories. So I'm, constantly, getting models and sort of trying to usually not just sort of render the model and kind of like just like the model, but use that model to tell something more complex, that it's just sort of like a piece of the story instead of the model itself being the entire story. So that's kind of, where I'm trying to make more sort of narrative pieces each day that kind of sort of tell a little or give more atmosphere and look like they have sort of a bit of a story versus just kind of like, here's a picture of a 3D model.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
So has that helped you, focus where you're going to be going with your creative process, is having some kind of narrative in mind? And how do you even figure out what the narrative is going to be? I mean, you have to do these every single day. Do you have like some things that are a series and kind of play off one another, or?
I do have a couple. For a bit there, I have a couple little series that I've been kind of like sort of adding to, I guess. One of them I did was kind of like I was super into these sort of like tankers or like shipping containers.
Right.
So I kind of like had all these sort of weird shipping container kind of renders, like clusters of shipping containers, and kind of like trying to imagine like some of the like bigger companies as sort of gone out of business far in the future, Facebook and Google and shit like that. So that was kind of like a sort of little series that I kind of have. And there's other sort of little kind of narrative things that I'll sort of pick at. It's not something that it's like, okay, every single day for the next like 2 weeks, I'm going to do this one thing. Because again, I would get bored, like kind of being locked in. So it's sort of like, every, week or two, I'll sort of add to that kind of narrative. So I think there's things I have going like that, but otherwise it's kind of just trying to like come up with something each day. There's usually, I don't have like today, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Most days I have no idea. It's kind of like try and figure something out that day. I can't I don't have 3 weeks planned out. Like Tuesday, I'm going to do this. Then Wednesday, I'm going to freaking drop this. Then Thursday, oh man, I'm going to fucking
giant whiteboard.
Every day it's no. Every day it's just fucking scrambling. Like what's the least embarrassing thing I can do in the next 2 hours? I would say that's much more accurate. Most of it is trying to minimize embarrassment. I would say the overriding sort of driving factor in the everydays.
So maybe, okay, through your everyday process, what's been like your lowest point have you ever gotten to a point where you're like, I can't do this anymore? And how do you overcome that?
No.
No.
Because what do you mean I can't do this? I can't put a JPEG on the internet.
So you've never
A little more to it than that.
I can't put a shitty picture out. No, I've never thought that.
You've never woken up one day and been like, you know what, this everyday thing, a little overrated. Think I'm gonna hang up the old cleats there.
After 10 years,
you're just gonna keep going. It's just so ingrained into your day. Be like not eating all day.
Yeah, I don't. There's no day where it's like, I think something a little more life altering would have to happen to sort of, because this is such a big part of my life, and like now that it would have to be a little more like, I'm just feeling lazy today, I'm not going to do it. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. And your question of like sort of hitting rock bottom, I mean, I would say hit rock bottom every other night where it's just like, oh God, this is fucking terrible. Hit post because I'm fucking out of time. I need to go to bed. Like there's many times where it's like, God damn it, this is fucking embarrassing that I'm like putting this out. This is fucking trash. Like that is the overriding, feeling. I would say 75% of the time when I hit post, that it's like, God damn it, because there's always like, I think I'm. I don't know, to some point, I guess, where I can see all the things that I should fix or could fix maybe if I had more time, in terms of just color composition. I think my eye is critical enough at this point that it's like I can see all the things wrong with what I'm doing. I just don't have time to fix them, or in some cases, I don't have the skill to fix them. So yeah, it's just there's definitely, but there's again, it's one day, so it's kind of like, I don't know, it sucks, but I'm gonna post it and move on, because it's kind of like I'll have another. That's I think sort of the beauty with the everyday is it's not this like you have a chance tomorrow,
right?
Like, well, this sucks. Tomorrow's another day. I'm going to fucking and I think it's almost motivating in some ways. Like if I do something like really shitty the day before that, it's like, okay, I got to fucking like try and make up for that, because yesterday was fucking just awful. So there's some level of like it kind of motivating me to like try harder the next day, I guess.
Yeah. And you have to fail to get to the success, right? Like success, the ingredients is all a bunch of failures. So I think that's super important to touch on, is that you live to create another day, and if you're doing things right, you're going to be better today than you were yesterday, and then 2 years ago, and just keep on pushing, keep on improving.
So how long did it take you, Mike? Because it was interesting when EJ asked you if you ever thought about quitting, and you pretty much instantly said, nah, like I would have to be hit by a car twice, for that to happen. And, I think everyone listening can, has probably had some experience, like trying to like lose weight or something, and you eat healthy for 3 days, and on day 4, you just lose your motivation. Or I'm sure a lot of people have tried every days before and made it 15 days. Was there a point where you just felt like you had so much momentum that it was easier to keep going than to stop?
So let me be clear on that. I would not consider myself like a type of person who can just put their mind to anything and like stick with it. So all those things you're saying, like eating good and exercising and blah, blah, blah. Like,
you do none of those.
No, I try to do those. I'm just like anybody else. I try to do those things, and I have varying degrees of success. And 3 months later, it's kind of like, I feel like we're not eating that great again, or got in, I fucking, haven't ran in probably, 2 weeks. And so it's kind of like, I fucking fall off the horse and get back on and, start running again. So I don't think that like across the board, I'm this just fucking powerhouse of goddamn determination and willpower and fucking stick with itness, whatever. No, I think I honestly feel like I kind of got lucky in that I was able to sort of just build up this momentum that has continued to carry me. And in terms of like stopping, it honestly, I mean, besides just sort of like motivation, I believe more strongly now than when I started that this is the best way to like get better quicker. And I still feel like there's so many things, exactly going back to like, no, I've got color. It's like, no, the fuck I do. Like, I don't have any of these things. Like, I have so much more. I look at so many people's work and it's just like, I am getting fucking owned. Like, seriously, look at that. It's just fucking beautiful. So it's sort of like, it doesn't seem like, I don't know, there would be no reason to quit. You know, so my skills are definitely nowhere close to where I want to be in just a wide spectrum of different areas. So I think, you know, that's really not something that kind of has crossed my mind in any sort of like serious manner, I guess.
So what you just said, it kind of reminded me of one of my favorite sayings. So I used to run a studio, and like I would have artists underneath me that were kind of like perfectionists, and I would repeat something that my dad used to tell me, which I don't know if this is good or bad, but it's don't let perfect be the enemy of done. Yeah. And, you know, this idea of like, okay, well, you're not really happy with what you just did, but you know it could be better, but you got tomorrow. So like tomorrow's another chance. But my question is, you know, at this point, every practice that you do is now public and has lots of likes and retweets and things like that. And you know, for someone starting out who like they look at what you're doing and they're like, I'm not there yet. I have many years of everydays before I ever get there. Would you still recommend that someone starting out posts publicly things they do? Do you think there's like a positive effect of having that pressure on you that now it's like the public expects it? Or do you think that in the beginning that can actually be counterproductive?
No, I definitely think it's still very important to like post in public. And I think there's a lot of people who I think things have changed since when I started out, because again, this was before sort of Facebook was just kind of starting. I didn't have a Facebook account. I was already done with college. There's no Instagram, no Twitter. So everything was just posting on my site and nobody saw it. And I think up until fairly recently, the last few years, I would say, if you were starting out and you posted things on the internet, nobody would see it. And I think right now, I think people, you know, I've heard some, you know, things from various people of kind of maybe being a little, I don't want to say negative on everydays, but just kind of questioning, you know, hearing people like kind of chasing likes, this or that. I think that's like a concern for people, some people. And I think the difference now versus years ago is, for whatever reason, Instagram, I think in particular, their algorithm has changed, or it's in a position right now where you are able to see those people who are just starting out. And I think that's different. It's never been like that. There was always, you know, 25 years ago, there was a shit ton of fucking shitty Nirvana bands playing in garages, trying to fucking be Kurt Cobain. And they sucked and they were terrible and they were just fucking copycats and nobody heard them. But now you fucking start out and you post something and you've been posting things for 3 weeks and somebody could see it. I could see it. Before that, I had no way of seeing it. If you were some shitty whatever, I would never see your work. Nobody would ever see it. So I think what's changed is not people starting out and doing shitty work. That's always been the case. Everybody starts out and does shitty work. I think what's different now is it's easier to see that work. But I don't think that's necessarily always going to be the case. Maybe, I mean, I honestly have no idea how Instagram's algorithms are going to look, you know, 3 years from now, whatever. They will continue to change.
Right. It's a pretty interesting dynamic, though. I mean, and that's something that, you know, the students are going to have to think about, because doing everydays. See, I kind of think that you can do everydays. So I've talked to a lot of illustrators, and illustrators, professional ones, definitely do every day, but it's called a sketchbook, and they just draw in their sketchbook every single day, but no one sees it but them. And I think that that's actually, I mean, for some people, it's healthier that way until you get to a level of like competence. Because once you start posting things on the internet, you're also opening yourself up for criticism, and that could be devastating if it's not at the right time in your development.
I would say yes, that's true. Again, I don't want to like say that there's a right or wrong answer here. I completely agree with what you're saying. Like, I think there is some value to doing sketches and keeping them in your sketchbook. If you are somebody who's very sort of gonna not be able to handle criticism on the internet, I think it's tough because like I'm saying, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. I think everybody sort of has a different path. The thing that I think benefits from putting stuff publicly is you get better at just like it's done. To me, it's much easier to do to stick with an everyday if you have a bit more of a sort of objective start and end, and whether you did it or did not do it. Versus if you do a sketch, you could do something that's like, I sketched for 5 minutes. And then it's like, well, I sketched for 5 minutes in my sketchbook. And it's like, but if you have to post that publicly, you're not going to do something for 5 minutes and want to fucking post that. It's going to like sort of pressure you into trying harder because you know you have to post that publicly. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits. I think in terms of the feedback, you just need to be like, fuck the feedback. You're not probably going to get either any sort of like constructive, helpful feedback on Instagram. I would say that the amount of constructive, helpful feedback you're going to get on Instagram, YouTube, any of these places is extremely little. 99% of the time, you're going to get people saying that was awesome when it probably wasn't awesome. Or you're going to get people saying that's fucking stupid when it was just like, okay, cool. Like, thank you. That doesn't fucking help me. So I think the amount of useful criticism you're going to get is shockingly low. So I would just not pay attention to that at all. Just if you need to disable comments or you need to do whatever to just block yourself from looking at that, block yourself from looking at that. But I still think posting publicly, at least for me, it raises the bar of like, again, I'm motivated a lot by not wanting to put out embarrassing work.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
I think, well, because I have a lot of people that will, and I always encourage people to, when they follow a tutorial of mine, to like, I love to see what people are working on. And then for this, even for this class, like I am really pumped up to see everyone's work. And I think when you put in more effort than just uploading a JPEG to the internet and just like fly little JPEG, and you actually like maybe tag some artists that you like, I'm like, hey, check out, this, what do you think? And actually seeking out helpful feedback and not just, dope ass likes all the time. Cause I think you need to take that effort to get better.
Yeah. I honestly, actually, I think what you're saying to me makes sense. And I think maybe me saying all social media comment is just garbage is because I haven't engaged it and tried to make it more productive. Like you're saying, doing the things that you're saying, like that makes sense to me. I think you could get a higher level of sort of feedback by sort of trying to engage people like that. I personally just have not done that. So I honestly think what you're saying, like that does make sense. If you take the time to sort of engage your audience and sort of, kind of point them in a more constructive direction, I guess, is what it sounds like you're doing. That to me makes sense. So yeah, I would say don't listen to what I was saying. Do what you did.
Well, I think it's important too because as you were saying, like as you've been creating, you're getting a more critical eye and you're developing that taste, that whole, the Ira Glass taste,
Sure.
Very famous little YouTube video. And I think that, The Gap. Yeah, The Gap. I think that's very, very important because even for me, I go back and watch all my old reels and actually stumbled upon something on Creative Cow. They have like back in like the late 2000s, I would upload my reels to Creative Cow, and for some reason I was on Creative Cow like searching for some answer to a question, and there's like some answer to a question that was answered in 2009 that was helpful for right now, which is awesome in itself. But I was like, oh, I forgot about this whole reel section. I looked at my reel, I'm like, oh my God, this is like embarrassingly bad. But I think that that's good, because if you look on your reel from 5 years ago, or hell, even last year, and you're like, that was the best stuff I've ever made, I think you're not doing the right things you need to be doing to improve, because you should be looking at your stuff that you made yesterday and be like, man, I could have done that much better, because you're slowly refining your taste and honing your skills. And I think that that's perfectly fine. I think it is hard to get constructive feedback if you're not, because you're not, unless you're creating something, there's nothing to give feedback. So that's the most important part. And I think that's the part that you got right, Mike, is where you're just, you know what, hell or high water, I'm going to get better just from sheer brute force.
I think the thing that's tough too, and one of the things that to me turns me off from putting too much stock into people's comments, is I don't know if I should be listening to them. So there's just a lot of people where it's like, you should do this. And it's like, should I though? And then like, you know, sometimes I'll look at, occasionally I'll see people's like negative comments or this or that, and I'll look them up and it's like, you haven't done shit, dude. Why the fuck am I listening to you? So it's kind of like, there's a lot of like, anybody can just post a fucking thing. It doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. That's one reason I guess I would maybe go take people's comments with a grain of salt. That it's sort of like, I guess if I was looking for feedback, I would go more to somebody that you trust, somebody like you, or somebody who's, you know, a professor or something like that, who like has a critical eye and who's done work, and who's somebody whose opinion you, you know, really respect, and put a lot more stock into what they say than what Surfer Girl 66 says. This is fucking, this is freaking whack, yo. I don't know.
So as far as what about like, so you're not doing every days. Do you, if you're not doing every days, I should say that, because you're doing every days, do you maybe to get into the habit of posting, just like maybe posting your process? What do you feel about that? Like if you are doing sketches or showing, because I feel like with Instagram stories, I'm seeing a lot of that. And that's a little bit less daunting or intimidating than putting it up there, because an Instagram story, it's like poof in a day. Do you feel like that's a good?
I think that could be a good sort of like maybe compromise, I guess, in some ways, if you're worried about these things sort of sticking around. To be honest, I'm not so worried about shitty work that I've done sticking around out there, because it's like the only, you know, the best way to fucking get over that is to put out good work that will like push that down further. So I think it's kind of, I wouldn't get too hung up on stuff like that. I think the Instagram stories, you know, could be a good way to do that. But to me, I kind of like to see the progress of an artist, you know, and like to see the whole thing, versus just like, you know, they've got like 50 good things or 20 good things or whatever, 10 good things. You know, I personally like to see the like bad things, because you never know. I mean, again, there's if I only posted the things that I felt were really good, I guarantee you I would not post 90% of the time. So if somebody else is finding some sort of inspiration in this, or liking it, or it sparks some idea for them, it's like awesome. It didn't really do that for me. I learned something. I'm not really happy with the final product, but maybe it's not my like, you know, position sometimes to judge whether this is good or bad. It's kind of like, it is what it is. I'm putting it out there. The world can judge. I don't like it, but if somebody else likes it, awesome. So I think with some of these things that go away, I think that could be good. And again, this is just like for me, like if that's, you know, doing posting works in progress or stuff like that, if that's what you feel most comfortable doing, like definitely like do that. I think for me, doing every days is the easiest way to sort of like stick with something and make sure I am doing it, because most days, like it's not convenient. Like today, I've got a shit ton of stuff to do. It is absolutely not convenient for me to do my everyday today. So if I was not doing every days, I would not spend an hour or 2 hours just focusing on trying to get better at just making a picture today. I just would not do that. So I think there's, that's why I sort of, it works for me. But again, everybody I think has different sort of like workflows. If you're somebody who, they're more comfortable sort of posting works in progress and you're seeing good results with that, then I would absolutely like continue to do that. I think, and I love seeing stuff like that and seeing people's like, stuff that's sort of like how they're going about it and being able to kind of follow along.
Mm-hmm. So as far as, it's hard to commit to an everyday. I know you've done some more longer form projects while you're doing everydays as well. Do you feel like you maybe learn more doing one form or another, like one short form, like every day? Or do you feel you learn a lot more when you try to take all your skills to tackle a more intense, longer form project?
I think they feed into each other. I think there's things, and like you were saying, in terms of like muscle memory, just getting quicker with the tools that you're using. I think that's something that the everydays help with a lot in terms of being able to get very quick, just moving around Cinema 4D and doing just basic shit that you're going to have to do day in, day out. Just moving the camera around, moving stuff around, rotating shit. Like the quicker you can get at that by just sheer muscle memory repetition is going to help, in all of these facets. But I think the BJ clips and the short films that I do, they have different, obviously, timelines. So they have different things that those are times where I will like dig in and like, okay, I'm going to try and like figure out how to actually do this thing that I want to do, or, try and do something, obviously a little more complicated. That's going to take a couple hours where I'm not, under the gun of like, okay, fuck, I've got 2 hours to do this and it needs to be like posted in 2 hours. So I think they teach different things, but they kind of feed off each other in terms of, one helping the other and sort of vice versa.
Do you ever feel like you get into a rut where you feel like you're just doing the same thing over and over again and really not learning, and you're just kind of in a comfort zone? Do you ever get into zones like that? Because I know, like with learning character work, I'm like, man, I've rigged characters and I'm having them do the same damn movements because they're movements I know how to do, and it's almost subconscious because, like, oh, this is just the movement I do because that's what I've been doing or whatever. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about that.
I 100% feel like I get into like ruts of things because it's like I don't wake up every day and have like, oh man, here's a fresh idea and it's fucking great. And that's just not, nobody's like that. So I feel like you lean on certain things and you kind of get into comfort zones. But that again, for me personally, is where because I'm posting it publicly, like, oh, another one of these. This is fucking embarrassing. God damn it. I've got a million things exactly like this. It also pushes me to like try and think of new things because I don't want to like do the same fucking thing over and over. So there again, it kind of like minimizing embarrassment is the overriding factor that drives me forward in terms of that.
Well, it's also comforting to know that if you do get into like a repetition, at least something that was super, super hard to figure out to begin with is now like smooth sailing for you, I
think the fact that you've recognized that it's kind of like, it's going to push you to like do something different. I think if you don't recognize that you're like doing the same fucking thing over and over, I think that might be bad. But then I look at, I guess, I don't know, because then I look at people who like have developed a very signature style and they've like pushed it so far and they're so fucking like badass with it that it's kind of like, and then I'm sort of like, in one instance, you could say, well, this person's doing the same thing over and over because all their pictures kind of, look the same. But then it's like, but those pictures look fucking badass. So it's kind of like, I don't know that that's necessarily something I would universally worry about. I don't know. I would worry more about not doing work than doing the same work over and over.
Right. Yeah. That shouldn't be the problem. I feel as long as you're putting in the work and doing the work, then you're already getting a habit in there. That's a good habit. Whether you're learning something new every day, it doesn't really matter as long as you stick to it, because eventually you're going to stumble upon something that you're like, oh, I got better at this. Or in like you were saying, where you're so good at something, you do it so quickly. It's like, all right, well, and I'm especially for your everydays, I'm sure you're at the point where, all right, I got all this done in an hour. I have a whole hour left to like do something else and improve on this. So you can focus on different things and kind of self-assess, like, what do I need to do now?
Sure. I think it's a fine line between like developing a style and pushing that style forward and like feeling like you're in a rut doing the same thing. I think if you feel like you're in a rut, then I think you will just naturally do something different. But I feel like if you don't feel like that, then I don't know, you're probably going to like keep pushing in that same direction. And that might not be a bad thing, because you're kind of like, you're getting better and better at sort of like doing that one thing. And if that, one thing is something that sort of like resonates with people, then that's, a good thing. Again, going back to like the difference between having, a style that you're pushing towards and kind of feeling like you're in a rut, I guess, is kind of a fine line. And it's sort of something you'll just know, I guess.
If you're not having fun doing it anymore and it's on your own time and it's not for a client, then what the hell are you doing? Like, you should be enjoying yourself, right?
Yeah. If you're kind of like, this sucks, like, then you'll just do something else. That's where I feel like if you with like doing it every day, it's like you have to do something. So if you're like, I don't like doing what I just did the last 3 weeks, then it's like, well, then I have to do something else, because I don't want to fucking do that thing again, but I have to do something. Yeah. You know what I mean? Instead of like feeling like you're in a rut, but then just not putting out more work because it's like, well, I'm in a rut. I don't have any other ideas of where to push things next. Well, you got to put.
You got to create yourself out of that box.
Yeah, and that's, I think, for me at least, the only way to like do it, because it's sort of like, I 100% get in ruts where it's just like, oh God, I've done this fucking whatever a million times, it blows, but it's like the only way to get out of it is kind of keep pushing till it kind of like something else clicks and you kind of like move on or push the idea forward more, I guess.
I kind of wanted to sum up. I've been writing like little sort of tidbits down as you guys have been talking, because I always like with these podcasts to have like a takeaway from it. And it's interesting, Mike, because the way that you operate and like your career and sort of the way that you achieved success is very unique. Not everyone, like most people don't do it the way you did it. But I think there's like a lot of lessons. You've said some pretty wise things today. So I'm just going to say them out loud just so like the listener can sort of incorporate that. One thing that I think is really interesting is that you use embarrassment as a motivator. I've never really thought about that. I've heard that advice before, but usually it'll be put like, make yourself publicly accountable. Like if you want to go on a diet, tell everybody on Facebook, I'm going on a diet, so that people will know. But by generating this momentum of your everydays, you would be embarrassed, I think, if you like got too hungover one day or like you're too drunk and then like, oh shit, I didn't do it yesterday. Oh crap. 11 years down the journey.
I would be more than embarrassed. I would be extremely, extremely disappointed in myself and super fucking pissed. That would be a day I would never forget. I would be very, 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 very pissed at myself.
And there's not much better motivation than knowing that. Another thing I wrote down, from the beginning of this conversation was about sort of just, grasping at straws in the beginning where you don't really know what you don't know. And you're not even sure like what you should be learning. And it's funny because I always kind of looked at that phase as unnecessary. I was like, if I just had the right teacher, the right, format, I could skip that part. But you made a good point that like there's a lot of value to that. And there are some lessons that you really can only learn the hard way. I think for 3D artists, like when and where to use global illumination might be that, like, that's probably the most common one I can think of. Also, one of the things that's really, I think, obviously like you've been doing everydays for a long time, but the momentum that you created in the first, let's say, year or two, before anyone was really paying attention, that momentum is still around today. And so that consistency creating momentum is something that I think somebody on day 2 of their everydays should keep in mind that like that momentum didn't just happen to you overnight. It took a long time, but once it builds, it's a pretty powerful force, and it would take probably an act of Satan to to derail you at this point, you know?
Yeah, it grows. It continues to grow, the like power of that. Because if you stop something after a month, you're like, fuck, I did that after a month. You stop something after a year, you're like, God damn it, I did that for like a full year and then I stopped. You stop that after 10 fucking years, it's like, motherfuck.
It's like it's an event. Yeah.
Yeah, it's as the longer you get, that momentum will continue to like carry you, and it will be stronger and stronger motivator.
And the last thing I wrote down, which is something that like I should like remember more, but I think everyone taking this class should keep this in mind, is that there's always tomorrow. There's always another project. If you're doing homework assignments for this class and you're not happy with the way the last one went, you got a bunch of notes that you didn't agree with, whatever. Well, you're going to have another one like pretty soon, and there's always a next thing. Every day is just kind of like an extreme example of that, where there's an infinite number of the next one. But even in your career, if you get hired at a studio and you're working on a job and, your art director tells you what you just did sucks, there's going to be another one. And that's pretty powerful too, because artists always like to get depressed about, how inadequate we are. I think that's worth remembering.
Well, with Donald Trump in office, I don't know that I would say there's always going to be a tomorrow, but there will probably be a tomorrow.
Short of nuclear Armageddon.
I think that's true, though. I think you kind of put things up and on a pedestal, and I think just being able to recognize that there is always tomorrow to kind of like improve, that this isn't life or death, and none of these things is if you don't like what you did, put out something better the next day. Like that's definitely a strong component of it.
Preach.
I think with Instagram, one of the most important things to understand is, and this is like something that, because I listen to Gary Vaynerchuk a lot, and he said this one thing that always stuck with me, like you're almost bombarded with people that are way better than you every single day. Like everyone's posting all this amazing stuff about them on Facebook and And the problem with social media is, and especially Instagram, you see all these people making amazing stuff, is that you're seeing their highlight reel, basically. Like you're seeing all their highlights of all their best days, and you're comparing that to your everyday, like your day-to-day stuff. And you're just seeing the end result of all the success and all the hard work, and you're not seeing all the failures. No one's posting their failures to Instagram. No one's like, I had a crappy day today. Today sucked. Like I did something stupid. And like you post that on your Facebook update. Like you're not doing that. You're not saying that you did some dumbass thing today. So I think that's really, really important that you realize that do not compare yourself with everyone's best efforts when you're just trying to, start making your own things, And
I think that's easier said than done,
Totally.
To be honest. I'm like, I really try to like limit the amount of time I'm just sort of like mindlessly looking at like Instagram and shit like that, because like you're saying, like I personally find that kind of like, it makes me anxious and it makes me depressive, and it depressed and not like super depressed, but I don't find it to be helpful. I don't find that if I spend, 15 minutes just mindlessly looking through Instagram at all this like fucking awesome work, I don't feel like that puts me in a better place than I was 15 minutes ago. I think it's very useful for finding inspiration. And if I'm in the mindset of like trying to find, some idea to sort of like just kind of light the fire of that day of what I'm going to do to kind of get the ball rolling, then I find it to be very useful. But if I'm just sort of like mindlessly looking at it, it's just kind of like you're saying, people piling on, and it's just like so much fucking amazing work. And you kind of take like all of these people's like work, at least I do, in my mind, and like make it into this one giant super person who's like just dominating the fucking shit out of you, when it's like, wait, I just looked at like 50 different people's like work, and like some of this stuff they may have spent like a month on or whatever. So it's kind of, it's definitely easy to like, I can definitely vouch for, going on social media, looking at other people's work and feeling like shit. So I think that's something you need to like really try to like limit as much as possible, but just not going on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you're consuming more media than you're actually creating, then that's where you'll feel inadequate because you're like, man, I'm looking at all this stuff and I haven't even been working. Like I haven't been creating anything to even try to get good. And that's the only way you can get good is by creating and getting all the bad work out. And I think for those of you out there that just don't, that might be new to Beeple, or if you just learned about him recently and might not have even seen like some of his very first works, I think it's very important to like, I remember at Blend, and Joe, I think you were there where, or no, this was at some other event, AE World or something. Andrew Kramer showed up and he did a little talk and, holy crap, freaking Andrew Kramer here. And he showed his very first demo reel and it was the worst reel I've seen in my life. It was more crappy than my crappiest reel. And it was just like, I didn't know how to take it. Like I was laughing and then on the inside, I'm like crying because I'm like, he was way worse than me. Now he's so much better than me kind of thing. But I think it's important to see that every single person, no matter how successful they are right now, made their fair share of really crappy work. And the difference between them and you is that they pushed through, they put in all the work to get to the point where they're at now. So if you want to get to the point where Beeple is now, guess what? Pull up your bootstraps because you got a lot of work to do. And that's the only way you're going to get better, and not by moping around, feeling sorry for yourself. You just got to create you need to get all the bad work out of your system. The only way you can do that is by making and failing and sucking for a long time. And I feel like I still am terrible today, but you know what? It's all about having the right mindset. Is like, tomorrow is another day, and tomorrow is another day to improve at whatever I'm working on, Well, this was just super inspiring and amazing to have you on. And thank you again so much, Beeple, for Mike to come on and share your expertise, because you're definitely a unicorn in the MoGraph world. It's very inspiring for our students to hear about your journey, and hopefully our students are very inspired to put in the work to also get better and maybe even try the everyday process themselves. So is there any maybe parting advice you'd give to our students about creating everydays or just being an artist in general?
I think I've said enough dumb shit for one day. I think I've talked out of my ass enough for one day. No, but I appreciate you guys having me on and all the kind words and everything. And obviously want to wish good luck to everybody. Kind of keep at it and have patience, and you'll get there.
All right. Thank you again so much for coming on, Beeple. And we'll all be following your everydays, and don't stop. Don't ever quit.
Coolness. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Wow. Well, I bet you're feeling pretty inspired to start an everyday project like right now, right? You can see all of the show notes for this episode over at School of Motion. And if you want to learn more about Cinema 4D Basecamp, you can go ahead and visit the course page on the site. Thank you guys so much for listening in.